Imagine walking into a bank, desperate for help, only to be ignored, dismissed, or even ridiculed just because of how you look. Now, what if the man being turned away wasn't just another struggling soul, but a billionaire in disguise? This is exactly what happened when Richard Lawson, a self-made billionaire known for his philanthropy, decided to conduct a secret test. Dressed in tattered clothes, his hair unkempt, and carrying nothing but a worn-out backpack, he stepped into one of his own banks, one that prided itself on treating every customer with respect. But was that really true? Richard had built his empire from nothing, so he knew what it felt like to struggle. But over the years, he began to wonder, was his bank truly helping people in need, or had it become just another corporate machine that only cared about the wealthy? There was only one way to find out. As he walked up to the counter, the reactions were instant. The security guard eyed him suspiciously. The receptionist barely looked up. And when he finally reached a teller and asked to open a small account, the response was chilling. At first, they ignored him. Then, with a sigh of impatience, the teller told him he needed a minimum balance, far beyond what he claimed to have. But when he explained that he just needed a simple account to start saving, the teller smirked and gave a dismissive glance, before saying something that made Richard's blood boil. What happened next? Well, let's just say that this bank had no idea who they were dealing with, because the moment Richard revealed his true identity, the entire room froze. The manager came running. Faces turned pale, and what followed was a lesson no one in that bank would ever forget. But was it too late? Had they already failed the test? And what consequences would Richard unleash on them? Stay tuned, because what happens next is something you have to see to believe. The room fell silent. The once dismissive teller's face turned pale, her fingers trembling as she realized the mistake she had just made. The manager, a man who had spent years perfecting his customer service smile, rushed over, his expression shifting from irritation to panic. Just moments ago, Richard was just another nobody in their eyes, someone to be ignored, brushed aside. Now, he was the man who owned the very institution they worked for. But Richard wasn't just there to catch them off guard. He wanted to understand. Was this how they treated people who walked in with nothing but hope? If so, how many others had they turned away? How many dreams had they crushed simply because someone didn't look wealthy enough? The manager forced an awkward laugh, his tone suddenly dripping with fake warmth. "Mr. Lawson, we had no idea it was you. If only you had told us." Richard held up a hand, silencing him. That was the whole point. He shouldn't have had to announce his name to receive basic respect. He glanced around, watching the uneasy expressions on the employees' faces. Some looked guilty, others annoyed that they had been caught. But one question lingered in his mind. Was this a problem with just a few employees, or was it something deeper? Richard's eyes landed on an older woman sitting by the entrance, clutching a folder filled with papers. She had been there when he walked in, unnoticed just like him. Her tired eyes met his, and in that moment he knew. This wasn't just about him. He turned back to the staff, his voice calm but firm. "Tell me something. If I hadn't walked in here as a test, if I was just another struggling person looking for help, would anything have changed?" No one spoke. The silence was answer enough. But Richard wasn't done yet, because what happened next would not only expose the truth, but change the fate of this bank forever. The tension in the room was thick, like a storm about to break. No one dared to speak, but Richard could feel the weight of their unspoken excuses. He could see the thoughts racing behind their eyes, regret, fear, maybe even defiance. But none of it mattered. The truth had already been exposed. The woman by the entrance shifted uncomfortably, still clutching her folder. Richard took a step toward her. "Ma'am, how long have you been waiting?" he asked gently. She hesitated, glancing at the employees as if afraid to answer. Finally, in a quiet voice, she said, "Almost an hour." "An hour," he turned back to the staff, "and no one has helped her." The the same one who had dismissed him earlier, fumbled for words. We've been busy. Richard raised an eyebrow. He had watched them chat, scroll on their phones, and take long breaks while customers sat ignored. Busy. That was a lie, and they all knew it. The manager forced another smile. Sir, I assure you, we always strive to provide the best service. Richard's voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it now. That's not what I've seen. His words hung in the air, the weight of them undeniable. But he wasn't just here to call them out. He wanted to understand how deep this problem ran. He turned to the woman again. What brings you here today? Her grip on the folder tightened. I came to apply for a small loan, she said hesitantly. My business has been struggling, and I just needed a little help to stay afloat. Richard's jaw tightened. A small loan, something that could change a person's life. And yet, instead of being treated with dignity, she'd have been left waiting, invisible to those who were supposed to help her. His mind raced. How many others had been ignored? How many had given up and walked away, never getting the chance they deserved? He took a deep breath, his decision already made. This wasn't just about bad service. It was about something much bigger. And he was about to make sure everyone in that bank felt the weight of what they had done. The air inside the bank felt heavier now, thick with unspoken tension. The employees shifted nervously, avoiding Richard's gaze. The manager, still desperate to regain control, cleared his throat and forced another strained smile. Mr. Lawson, perhaps we can discuss this privately. I assure you, this is just a misunderstanding. Richard let out a quiet laugh, but there was no humor in it. A misunderstanding. He gestured to the woman still holding her loan application. Ignoring a customer in need is not a misunderstanding. Dismissing people based on their appearance is not a misunderstanding. It's a choice. The woman lowered her eyes, as if she were used to being overlooked. That realization made Richard's anger burn even hotter. He had built this bank on the principle that everyone deserved a fair chance, that financial help should never depend on how someone looked or dressed. And yet, here was proof that those values had been abandoned the moment he stepped away. The other customers in the lobby were watching now, their curiosity turning into quiet support. Some nodded in agreement, while others murmured among themselves. It was clear that this wasn't an isolated incident. The manager took a nervous step forward. Sir, I can personally assist this customer right now. There's no need for all this. He trailed off, realizing too late that there was no easy way out. Richard shook his head. So now that you know who I am, you're willing to help. What about everyone else who walked in before me? How many have you turned away? No one answered. The silence was louder than any excuse they could have given. Richard glanced toward the entrance as another man stepped inside. He was dressed simply, his jacket slightly worn, his hands rough from hard work. He looked around uncertainly, as if bracing himself for rejection. Richard turned back to the employees. Watch closely, he said. Then, stepping aside, he let the moment unfold naturally. Would they treat this man the same way they had treated him before they knew who he was? Or had they finally realized the truth? The test wasn't over yet, and what happened next would determine everything. The man at the entrance hesitated, his eyes scanning the room like he wasn't sure if he even belonged there. His hands clutched a small envelope, probably containing the last bit of money he had or documents proving his need for assistance. Richard stayed silent, watching. The bank employees had been exposed, but had they actually learned anything? Or were they just waiting for this moment to pass, hoping to return to business as usual once he left? The teller who had dismissed Richard earlier looked up at the man, her expression unreadable. For a moment, it seemed like she was about to greet him. Then, just like before, her face shifted into one of quiet indifference. Sir, if you don't have an appointment, you'll need to wait, she said flatly, already turning back to her computer. Richard's heart sank. They hadn't changed. Not even with him standing right there. The man hesitated, his fingers tightening around the envelope. I need some help, he said, his voice quiet but steady. The manager, still standing close to Richard, stiffened. He knew what was happening, and he knew Richard was watching. With a forced smile, he stepped forward, suddenly eager to play the hero. "Of course. I'd be happy to assist you personally," he said, voice dripping with fake enthusiasm. But before he could take another step, Richard spoke. "No," he said firmly. "Let's not do this game." The manager froze. The teller looked up. Richard walked over to the man at the entrance. "Tell me," he said, "how many times have you been here before?" The man glanced at the staff before answering. "A few times," he admitted, "but I've never gotten help." That was it. That was all Richard needed to hear. He turned back to the employees, his expression unreadable. "I want everyone to hear this loud and clear." The entire bank went silent. The tension was at its breaking point. Then Richard took out his phone, tapped the screen, and turned it around for everyone to see. The bank's security footage was playing, and every single moment of their mistreatment had been recorded. The color drained from the manager's face as he stared at the screen. The footage showed everything, every dismissive glance, every ignored customer, every moment of disrespect. There was no denying it now. The truth was right in front of them. The teller gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The other employees looked at each other in stunned silence, realizing just how deep they had dug their own grave. Some shifted uncomfortably, while others looked as if they wanted to disappear. Richard lowered the phone but didn't put it away. His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable sharpness to it. "You see, I didn't just come here to test you. I came here to see if the values this bank was built on still existed, and what I've seen today." He let the silence stretch for a moment. "It's unacceptable." The manager stammered, sweat forming at his brow. "Sir, please, we can fix this. We had no idea." "That's the problem," Richard cut in. "You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with respect." He turned back to the man at the entrance, who still stood there, unsure of what was happening. "Sir, would you come with me?" The man hesitated but nodded. Richard led him to the counter and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "I want this man to receive the help he deserves. And not just him, every single person who walks through those doors, effective immediately." The bank staff nodded quickly, eager to comply now that they knew who they had been dealing with. But Richard wasn't done. He turned to the manager. "You," he said, "I want a full audit of customer interactions from the past year. Every complaint, every loan rejection, everything." The manager swallowed hard. "Ah, yes, sir." Then Richard pulled out a piece of paper from his pocket. He unfolded it slowly, his eyes locking onto the manager's. "And as for you," he said, "I already made my decision before I walked in today." He handed over the paper. The manager took it with shaking hands and read the words that would change everything. Effective immediately, the bank was under new leadership, and Richard had already chosen their replacement. The manager's hands trembled as he read the letter. His face, once filled with confidence, now showed only shock and defeat. The bank's leadership had been decided before this test even began. Richard had already seen the cracks forming, and today had only confirmed what he feared. Change wasn't just necessary, it was long overdue. The employees stood frozen, their eyes darting between Richard and their soon-to-be former boss. Some looked relieved, others uncertain, but no one protested. They all knew the truth. This wasn't a punishment. It was a wake-up call. Richard turned back to the man he had invited in. "What's your name?" he asked. "Daniel," the man said, his voice quiet but steady. Richard nodded. "Daniel, your loan application, consider it approved. Not as a favor, but because you earned it, just like anyone else who comes here in good faith." Daniel's eyes widened. He opened his mouth to speak but hesitated, emotions clouding his expression. "Thank you," he finally whispered, gripping the envelope in his hands. "You have no idea what this means." Richard smiled. "I think I do." He looked around the bank one last time. The customers, the employees, the silent lessons hanging in the air. This place would never be the same again, and that was exactly the point. From now on, Richard said, his voice firm but calm, this bank will stand for what it was always meant to: fairness, opportunity, and respect. Not just for the wealthy, not just for the ones who look the part, for everyone. With that, he turned and walked toward the exit, leaving behind a bank forever changed. As he stepped outside, the cool air hit his face, and for the first time in a long time, he felt hope, not just for his bank, but for the people it was meant to serve. Because today wasn't just about exposing failure. It was about proving that no matter how broken a system may seem, it's never too late to fix it.